What's good, everybody? Surreal AG here from the Lockdown Defense Sports Network, and you already know I'm back at you again with another round of the Hit Squad's 2025 preseason preview. Now, we're going to stay down south for this week, looking at the AFC this go around. More specifically, for my video, we're going to be looking at them Titans out of Tennessee and what's in store in 2025. Now, I don't mean to beat a fan base while they're down a little bit, talking to you Titans faithful, but just a quick recap to 2024. I think we can all agree was certainly a season to forget in Brian Callahan's inaugural year as head coach. Tennessee ultimately went 3-14 overall, fourth in the AFC South, and saw a complete reduction in a 50% reduction in their win total from Vrabel's last season in 2023. And I think that season also all but confirmed that the Will Levis experiment was undoubtedly a failed one. So a lot to forget about in 2024, a lot to move on from, a lot to strip down to the studs and rebuild. But, looking ahead at 2025, I think the Titans offseason in a nutshell, resulted in a collection of positive and what I feel will be impactful roster moves for the year ahead and years ahead, really. And I think the number one word to use for Titans faithful out there looking ahead at 2025, or the theme, if you will, would be hopeful or hopefulness. They hopefully got their franchise QB. They hopefully retooled their offensive line to help him develop. They hopefully made the right moves to, alter the trajectory of their franchise, who has registered, 3 straight losing seasons. So a lot to be positive about in what they did and a lot to be hopeful for in looking ahead. And without much more onto that, ladies and gentlemen, let's just start looking at what they did to move ahead. We'll start here with the notable, free agent signings as well as re-signings and ultimate releases of players. Like I said, a lot to move on from in 2024, and the Titans certainly did that. They were aggressively active in free agency and at the same time kind of stripped down some big money players in the old regime or let them walk. I'll start with the re-signings because there are not many of them, but you see they re-signed interior D lineman Sebastian Joseph Day. They also re-signed running back Julius Chestnut. Corresponding to some of the activeness they had in free agency, they released Harold Landry III as well as the corner Awuzie. On top of that, they also let some key players walk in free agency, including Jerome Baker, the linebacker, Quandre Diggs, the safety, and Tyler Boyd, the wide receiver. And now looking at what they did in free agency, you can see the CVS receipt of signings right here. And that's not even all of them, ladies and gentlemen. But quickly running down the list, they signed, offensive tackle Dan Moore Jr. to 4 years, $82 million with an M. They signed interior D lineman Draymond Jones. They signed linebacker Cody Barton. They signed offensive guard, the vet, Kevin Zeitler. They signed the safety, Xavier Woods. Signed wide receiver, Van Jefferson. Also signed wide receiver, Tyler Lockett. They signed edge rusher, Lorenzo Carter. They signed quarterback Brandon Allen and, decided to totally revamp their special teams unit by signing the punter, Johnny Hecker, and the kicker, Joey Sly. But looking at kind of the big ticket or most impactful free agency additions, I think first and foremost, we start with the guy at the top in Dan Moore Jr. Signing him ultimately lets them move J.C. Latham, their first-round pick from last year, to right tackle, which is his natural position. And that's not to say that Latham was a bad left tackle, but they desperately needed more help on the offensive line. And, I think to some degree, they had a lot of money to play with. There wasn't a whole lot of tackles available in the free agency pool, and they got the best guy who just happens to play on the left side. But with that being said, I do think the contract is a little bit much for a guy of Dan Moore Jr.'s caliber or resume, because they essentially paid him like a top 10 tackle without, that really being put on the field in his career up to this point. But again, I think that was just a victim of a glaring team need. the free agency pool that is available and, them deciding to pull the trigger. So, Dan Moore Jr. certainly an impactful free agency signing. Another signing I think will be an impactful one is Tyler Lockett, which, ultimately by doing that signing, Tennessee does what they always do and, continue to add to the Titans washed up wideout emporium, if you will, of bringing someone on the wrong side of 30 into town to just excite the fan base. But with that being said, I think Tyler Lockett still has a lot left in the tank. He is a reliable receiver, a possession catch receiver. He does not put himself or his body in harm's way, really. And I think he would be an excellent safety valve for new QB Cam Ward. And then, the final impactful signing, continuing on a trend here a little bit, because we all know what the most glaring need was for Tennessee. And I think that is the signing of the offensive guard, Kevin Zeitler, to 1 year, $9 million. First and foremost, you're adding a very dependable, offensive lineman, a very experienced veteran. And I think a guy that immediately bolsters the interior of the line and will certainly help, keep Ward upright, help develop him further, and ultimately help progress him as the season goes on. But yeah, that's, the notable free agent additions and reductions from the roster in 2024. Moving on to what they did in the draft. Honestly, I really liked what Tennessee did in the draft. They, totally wanted to revamp their offense. You could see that was apparent by the amount of picks they spent on the offensive line. 6 of their 9 selections here were team captains, which is something that Brian Callahan apparently values from a culture standpoint. And so excited to see what that, all those leaders coming in bring to the fold. And also a large chunk of their draft class did not miss any games in college due to injury. So they've got a lot of dependable prospects with tremendous upside, but I think that, that's just what it is. A lot of hope and a lot of potential and not really a whole lot of realized value yet in the picks they made. But, looking at just kind of the picks they made as a whole, obviously had the number 1 pick. They took Cam Ward, the QB. Second round, they took Aladejo out of UCLA. Took the safety, Kevin Winston Jr. out of Penn State in the 3rd round. They took a trio of offensive weapons in the 4th round, taking Dyke from Florida, the tight end Gunnar Helm from Texas, and Ayo Manor, the wide receiver from Stanford. Bolstered again the offensive line by taking Jackson Slater out of Sacramento State, who I know myself and Coach Defense, fellow networky in there, had listed as a draft sleeper going into the draft. And then to round things out in the 6th round, they took cornerback Marcus Harris out of Cal and the running back Mullings from Michigan. Now, as I pointed out, they added 3 pass catchers in the 4th round. Out of those 3, I really like Ayo Manor. He's a big-bodied receiver, has great body control, and strong hands to steal passes, at the high point. So exciting to see what he does with Cam Ward in this offense. As I mentioned, Slater is, I think, an offensive lineman that comes from a small school but carries a lot of upside. So excited to see what he can learn from behind Zeitler and ultimately become an impactful player along the line. And then, looking at the defensive players they took, the 2 they took in round 2 and round 3, I think, have a huge potential. I think they both honestly showed flashes on tape, leading into the draft to suggest that, they both have the tools to be among the best or the very, be either the best or among the best at their positions from this draft class. So, again, I think the overall theme for the draft and for this offseason was just to provide hope and, target potential and, just see what they can develop from there. So, that's the draft as a whole. Really love the haul that Tennessee got. Looking at other offseason moves, there were no significant trades. They made a few minor coaching changes, but really nothing too crazy. I think the big change was obviously hiring Mike Bargazzi, the GM, who came from Kansas City and replaced Rand Carthen after 1 year. So they already wanted to move on from that and took someone from that KC pedigree to help sort of right the ship. And, interesting enough, on top of adding a new GM, they also added two old Raider GMs in their front office to help him out, and Dave Ziegler and Reggie McKenzie. So I think you can already kind of see their fingerprints all over the offseason moves that were made. And, I think ultimately Tennessee's in the right hands now to make smart smart, educated business decisions in terms of the roster and moving the team forward. So, looking ahead at 2025 in terms of the schedule, it's right there in front of you, ladies and gentlemen. But compared to some of the other teams I've done, Tennessee drew the lucky stick in this draw here because they do have the eighth easiest schedule based on the opponent's projected win totals. They also have the fourth easiest schedule if you go by their opponent's 2024 winning percentage. As a whole, Vegas has their win total at 5.5 games. They have no primetime games. I think them and the Saints, and I think one other team are of those, but maybe one gets flexed if Cam Ward is as advertised or what they hope he is. I think they have a rough start to the year, obviously, in drawing the Denver Broncos defense in week one and facing some pretty stout defensive units the first part of the season. I think the big games I'm circling here, got to look at week 7 against the Patriots with Vrabel returning to town for the first time. You look at weeks 3 through 8, they have 3 AFC South games. So that is certainly a pivotal stretch to the trajectory of their season. Again, I circled this in the Browns video, but I'm going to circle it again here just to really hammer it in. But week 14, you got a potential Shador matchup against Cleveland. And then week 16, I'm going to go ahead and circle that as the in-house Chiefs fan because we could have a potential really exciting QB showdown against my Chiefs and Tennessee if, Ward has some kind of Jaden Daniels type rookie year. So, I think that is the key games to circle for 2025. Looking at the offseason as a whole for Tennessee, I give them a B+ grade. Like I said, I really love a lot of the moves they made. I did have to knock the overpaying of Dan Moore a little bit and just kind of, there's still some holes that need to be filled in the roster, and I don't know that can necessarily be done in this season. But I do have a pretty good improvement in the win total for 2025 with Tennessee. I got them ultimately at 6-11. So, quickly rolling through my projected win-loss total here. I got them losing week 1 to Denver because, come on, it's just a stout defense in Denver. Tough inaugural rookie game for Cam Ward. I got them losing week 2 to the Rams. I got them beating the Colts at home. I got them losing to the Texans away. I got them beating the Cardinals in week 5. I got them beating the Raiders in week 6. I see them losing a stretch of 3 games here between the Patriots, Colts, and Chargers. Rolling out of the bye, unfortunately, I see them losing to the Texans at home. And then I see them losing to the Seattle Seahawks. I see them beating Jacksonville. I see them beating the Browns. I see them losing to the 49ers, losing to my Chiefs, beating the New Orleans Saints, and ultimately finishing things out with an L against Jacksonville to round out the season. But as I put it, ladies and gentlemen, I do think we see an improvement for the Tennessee Titans. I think we see some questions get answered. Some things get confirmed as, people to build around. And, we see what they do in the 2025 offseason for 2026. And that's when I think they really make their presence known. But with that being said, we saw a huge turnaround with the Commanders just from essentially drafting the right QB. So if Tennessee made the right pick with Ward, and there was a lot of debate about that going into the draft, and I think they were the only ones that were as sure as they were about the pick they made. But if that's the right pick, we could see that type of turnaround with Tennessee. And I'll tell you why. Because first and foremost, if any of you try to tell me that you picked the Commanders to go to the NFC Championship game last year at this point of the offseason, I'm going to call you a bold-faced liar. And secondly, it can happen. A turnaround like that can certainly happen with just the right guy running the offense. And secondly, I think this AFC South is somewhat up for grabs. The Texans kind of had a little firm hold on it for a while, but I can see them stepping back just with the subtractions they made from the offensive side of the ball. And so we'll just have to see, we'll have to see if Tennessee can fit in the fold with the rest of the AFC South guys. But it certainly is time to find out if Cam Ward is, quote, the guy, and how him and BC or Brian Callahan handled the pressure of trying to turn a team around, coming off a losing season. Does the defense take a step forward with some additions that they made? And, how competitive will the AFC South be with the Texans taking a step back, the Jaguars retooling their offense, and the Colts trying to figure out who the hell their QB is going to be? So, that in a nutshell is what needs to be answered for the 2025 season. And I think if all of those are answered in a positive way, we could see an even better season than 6-11 for Tennessee. But that wraps up our Tennessee Titans preseason preview for 2025, ladies and gentlemen. As always, please be sure to hit that subscribe and like button down below. Titans fans, please let me hear from you in the comments. I would love to go through some friendly or aggressive banter about your team and how you feel about them. So let's hear from you. As always, if you want to get at me or any of the Hit Squad members, there's our social info. If you want to find some more Lockdown Defense Sports Network content, boom, we're anywhere and everywhere your smartphone takes you. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the Real AG. This is the Lockdown Defense Sports Network, and I'll see you when I see you. But let's make sure that everyone's out there stepping it up and locking it TF down, baby.